Welcome to another episode of No More Mondays Live, where we believe in the power of loving what you do for work. I am your host, Angie Callen, and y'all are in for a really special treat today. My friend Andy Foote is here with some fun, sarcastic humor and some good old snark that he and I love to share. And if you're lucky, maybe we'll get to a topic he knows a whole lot about: LinkedIn. Andy has made a name for himself over the years as a thought leader and content creator on LinkedIn, has a huge following of maybe questionable authentic humans, and he now specializes in helping people do the same and stand out on LinkedIn. His quirky and creative approach to doing just that is something I've appreciated and learned from, and probably have taken advantage of as I've gotten to know him over the last year or so. And I am excited for you to learn from him today. I would love to welcome the founder and host of the Curious AF LinkedIn radio show and reassuringly expensive LinkedIn coach, Andy Foote. Andy, welcome to No More Mondays.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro, Angie. I'm happy to be
aim to please.
with you. Yes, very nice.
I'm excited about this because this is a little bit of flipping the script. If any of you have ever tuned into Curious AF, the live LinkedIn radio show Andy hosts every morning, I am a frequent newscaster, guest / disruptor. And so now I get to control the narrative and see where this goes.
Angie, I think you're actually the most frequent. I'm doing the analysis now, but I think you've appeared on the Curious AF show the most since October. That's when I started running them.
Are we happy about that?
Can you not tell? I am absolutely delighted with that. We, as you say, we riff and we have fun with it. So yeah, absolutely. Even when you don't do your homework.
Even when I don't, I am notorious for showing up 4 minutes after sound check, which would be about 1 minute before the live, while searching for the story I need to bring to the show. But, that's just how I roll with my fly by the seat of my pants approach to things that I hide pretty well.
That's the thing. You do hide it very well. And, the show it's a bit of a test, isn't it? Maybe you don't. Well, yeah, it is. So I'm looking for potential for other co-hosts. So I'm constantly cycling in new people to the show. So yeah, I think if I want you on the show, if I want you back on the show, enough said. In other words, you have my endorsement. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I joke about the homework part of it. There is a bit of homework. I'm asking, co-hosts to present 2 news stories. I don't think that's a hard ask. And if folks don't do it, but are able to think on their feet on the show and actually Google, I'll give them, more time if I know that they're still searching, then I'll come to them last. So it all works out.
And for me, it's a really fun time to just meet, have some opinions, talk about news. We get into all kinds of really interesting stories. But most of all, I have loved the people I have met as you've grown your network through it. And I've made some really, really fun connections, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today as we dig into the behind the scenes world of the LinkedIn. I mean, we could throw algorithm, madness, whatever it is. And as you can see, Andy and I can go on a lot of tangents. We basically already started on one and make this show a whole lot of something about nothing. So I'm going to try to keep us on track and dig in to LinkedIn. And so here comes our first topic. Ready?
Ready.
I want to know why you've basically dedicated your life to LinkedIn. And on a serious note, I want you to really describe what you see as the advantages, the power of LinkedIn. Why is it such a fantastic resource to business owners, professionals, kind of anybody out there that's worth spending time in?
So it's target rich. I don't think there's any other social that has the vast collection of professionals who are looking for something. They're either looking for career advice or they're looking for marketing advice, etc., any kind of information, knowledge, and expertise. You can find it on LinkedIn. So the task is, who's the right person for me? And LinkedIn gives you multiple different ways to show off, to flex those muscles, whether they're intellectual, broadly intellectual, or they're marketing, LinkedIn, etc. So provided you know how to use the platform in a way that works best for you, I don't think there's any other platform that gives you the ROI. And I recognized this early on when I started experimenting with groups. And as I played more and more with the platform, Angie, and I experimented and experimented, kept on trying different things, kept on analyzing the results, I gradually taught myself. And once I taught myself, I wanted to share that knowledge. And then sharing that knowledge essentially enabled me to build this consulting business out of nothing. All right. So I was able to work from home back from 2008 onwards. And that I appreciate the flexibility. I appreciate the ability to reach so many different people. And I'm not a seller. I don't like to go and sell. I would much prefer to do my thing, and do it in a very unique and characteristic way, but in a way that attracts people to me. So people coming to me is the best possible thing. I don't want to go out and hunt. That's not my thing. I'm not happy doing it. I'm just not, it's not comfortable for me. I can do it, and I could probably, get more business, but I'm much more happy just putting out my content, people reading it and thinking, wow, this guy really knows his onions. I think I'll make a mental note. Maybe I'll use him. Maybe I'll come to him in my time of need. And indeed, that's what happens.
That's exactly what happens. And I love this. If we go to the hunter-farmer metaphor, a simile of sales, in a way, LinkedIn allows you to put out content, become a thought leader, show your expertise in something so that you're watering this little farm of yours that people will gravitate towards, but you don't have to necessarily go engage in messaging and proactive, aggressive, straight up marketing tactics. It's a little bit of a passive approach, but it is how you put your unique ideas out there and the right people come towards you. And I'm like you. My business started because of one comment I put on LinkedIn. Now, I had already decided to start the business, and a recruiter, and I still remember exactly who she was, and I could probably go find the post from 6.5 years ago, but she said something about how she helps people find jobs, not help people change careers. And early on in my business, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And I happened to be the first comment on her post. And I was like, I just gave it my straight up, here's my response. I help people change careers. And out of that came ding, a message in the inbox. And I wasn't trying to sell. I was just trying to say, hey, these resources are out there. And in turn, it got me my first, paid client. And from there, I kind of accidentally stumbled into what you can do on LinkedIn. But what you led with that idea of it's a target rich ecosystem where people are looking for advice. They're looking for trusted knowledge and expertise. And for some reason, putting yourself out there on LinkedIn establishes that. And I'm continuously surprised for all the pitfalls Microsoft has when it comes to LinkedIn, how well it's done at preserving that aspect of it, the professional nature of it, the thought leadership nature of it, and keeping kind of that more mainstream social media feel out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Microsoft, since acquiring LinkedIn, has pretty much left LinkedIn to do its thing. I think they've realized, well, there's nothing here really that we need to put our spin on or fix. And if anything, it's been the other way. I think they've been just sucking up all the data and all the info they can to sell Microsoft products. I think that's been my perception anyway.
Which now we're getting into kind of the second part of this, which is some of the frustrations that those of us that hang out on LinkedIn tend to come across. The algorithm, might as well be a 4-letter word, and just, general hiccups or frustrations with being a creator on the platform that I think can keep people from diving into it or trying it because, it can be that a little bit of intimidating. So talk to me a little bit about what you've seen, especially over the last close to 15 years of really living in depth in this world. What's changed? What do you think's coming? What should we expect? So whether you're currently active on LinkedIn, like somebody like me, or you might be somebody out there who wants to dip a toe in this water, what can we expect when it comes to engaging on LinkedIn, good, bad, or ugly?
Yeah, so I think once COVID hit, I think LinkedIn kind of left left the posters alone, left the creators to do their thing, and didn't care whether content was strictly knowledge-based or if it was purely social. I think they recognize with lots of people being at home, people, suddenly being unemployed and going to LinkedIn in droves, I think they made a decision that, okay, I think we're just going to give every post a decent amount of reach. Now that changed recently. I think there was a reaction from other users that, look, there's far too much social stuff here. There's far too much of the stuff that I would normally expect to see on Facebook, and they would say this is not LinkedIn. And so there was pushback, and because there are, there's obviously there's the folks that come here, as we said, looking for professional advice. They want to know who the experts are. It's very difficult to do that when you're looking at someone's post and they're talking about their vacation and there's no professional content whatsoever. It's purely social, purely designed to get engagement. Nothing wrong with that. But LinkedIn decided last year that they wanted to double down on content that was based on knowledge and advice. And so the ramification of that is that those posts that are purely social may not get the reach that they have been getting since COVID. I think that's the biggie, Angie, in terms of the change that I've seen. And LinkedIn have clearly spoken about this in a recent podcast, entrepreneurial.com, the Problem Solvers podcast, February 19th, with Dan Roth, the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn, and Jason Pfeiffer, the editor of entrepreneurial.com. He said that that's exactly what we're doing. So that's an interesting move. It helps people like me because I really don't do the purely social post. I may go social in my commentary, so comments on other posts, and I think that's a smart strategy because then you're showing your personality, and it's great because it gives you flexibility to comment, doesn't it? Because you're not necessarily having to speak about the topic, if you don't know it, but you can put in some ridiculous, 80s music or other Gen X stuff, just to say, hoist your flag and say, here I am, who else is with me? So yeah, that benefits me. This move to knowledge and advice in theory benefits me if the LinkedIn algo understands A, who I am, B, am who I say in terms of the profile, right? Is that true? So it's looking for signals to verify that I am indeed an expert.
And I love what you just brought up because you just wait for tomorrow when there's a little bit of a classic rock post coming your way from yours truly, because I think it's interesting. And what you and I don't know is Andy and I are nerds about this kind of stuff and talk about it ad nauseum and way more in depth than probably I would like to admit. And it's interesting because when this kind of shake up to the algorithm because we talk so much about it happened last summer. And kind of quote unquote going back to longer form, knowledge-based, research-based, informative content, I still, and that's what LinkedIn said it wanted to favor. I still saw kind of almost a resistance to that from the user base, and that the engagement was still in things that had a slight personal bend. And that's my personality on LinkedIn, is to say, hey, I went out and climbed this big cliff. Here's what you can learn from it. So it's adding an aspect of my personal life into things, but making sure it's still rooted in the professional brand or the professional takeaways. And I have still seen that stuff tends to generate more buzz. And so it's just interesting to me that it feels like LinkedIn is attempting to do something that maybe the user base isn't adopting. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's true, Angie. I think that essentially there are two camps on LinkedIn. There's the camp that have been there from the start, right? Let's call them the old guard. They may not be old, but they are guarding. In terms of, we want knowledge-based info that we can use, and we want experts to constantly share their insights. And the other camp are the relatively new folks that, let's call them Facebook transplants, and they are there because they just want the engagement. They just purely want the engagement, and they will be sometimes very creative in terms of the subjects that they come up with. Amazing creativity from these posts. And I think what's interesting about the two camps is that they've both got followings, but my take is that the followers of the Facebook transplants are perhaps more active and B, more loyal, right? That's what they're there for. And the thing is, when you're doing, depending on your creativity, it depends on, what I'm saying is they can do their thing more often than the other person, the old guard, who has perhaps more of a research-based approach where it takes more time to put content together, right? So they invest more time and effort into it. But the social post, if you've got it down, you can come up with a new topic, within minutes, and you can do that on a daily basis. I think that crowd is more loyal and is again, they have this flexibility to go wherever they want instead of just being tied down to a particular topic, whether that's Windows, tax, LinkedIn, etc., etc.
Oh, you said a couple good things there that I think brought a little realization just even for me, because I'm somewhere in the middle. I really started diving into the world of LinkedIn in 2018 when I started this business. And I think the guards changed with the pandemic, because that's when the content styles changed so drastically. There was a 15% influx in new users in a month when COVID hit. And so that really created a paradigm shift. And what I think is really interesting is it depends on the nature and the makeup of your followers and your audience on LinkedIn, and creating content that speaks to what they want and want to engage with.
100%.
And I think you can control and shift that, but you also have to know you're going to see a dip in engagement if all of a sudden you want to become a research-based knowledge. I used to post that kind of stuff a lot. And then it just started to fall off for people want it. But I know colleagues of mine who still get fantastic engagement on that kind of stuff. And I don't, because I think you're right. I've got the more loyal want to be inspired in like life and career, and not just in hardcore knowledge, maybe.
Right, and
I learned something on my own podcast. Woohoo!
Yay. I think you can see where LinkedIn is coming from, right? They certainly want discoverability for all of their users, but how can you prove, how can you verify that you are indeed an expert if you're only talking about where you go on vacation, or what your family is up to? In other words, Facebook. So how can you verify? The fact is that you can't, and that's not just an issue for people who are looking to perhaps follow someone. It's also an issue for, let's not forget, the recruiters who are paying LinkedIn a lot of money. That's where the majority of the revenue comes from. So whenever LinkedIn is doing something, think about who the stakeholders are here, and I think that's an important part of how LinkedIn are constantly saying, are you an expert? Prove it. You need to prove it again. You can't just have one post which catches fire. You've got to have multiple posts that get great engagement. Then we'll believe that you're an expert. So I think that's an important aspect.
Well, and I have found that consistency is the big name of the game here. And this takes us perfectly into kind of part 3 of this discussion, which is, how do we accomplish this stuff, right? So you brought up earlier a line that I think is very important to kind of reinforce here, which is, as long as you make this platform work for you. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And in this third part, I want to get into some like practical little tidbits and advice, and get in a discussion on how, if you're watching on LinkedIn Live, this is what you've been waiting for, right? How do I stand out on LinkedIn, and practically, how do I make this platform work for me? Because there's tons of theories. There's a whole bunch of best practices, quote unquote, myths on right and wrong ways to do things. And those misconceptions are what a lot of times leads to either intimidation in engaging, intimidation in content creation. So let's demystify it. And I want to focus on 3 tips, and they could be as long or short as you want them to be. But what are your 3 best pieces of advice on how somebody can stand out on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think number 1 is, when you say, when you ask, how do you stand out? I think you have to think about your mindset. I think that's important in terms of your longevity and how much effort you put in, how consistent you are. So it's a question of enjoying the journey, enjoying the process. I think that's very important, because if you're here for the long haul, you've got to think about, I think, your motivation for whatever you're doing on LinkedIn. Now, if you have the mindset of, oh, I need X amount of engagement every time I post, or X amount of reach, and you don't get that, then that's not a great long-term strategy. A better long-term strategy is enjoying the actual process of producing great content. So the best content that you can possibly produce, that's what you get enjoyment out of. That's why you're here. Otherwise, if you're looking at targets all the time and you're not reaching them, I think that's debilitating. I think that eats into your motivation and why you. So it's the why. It's not the how do I come across, how do I get more visibility. It's the why are you here? Why do you want the visibility? And I think it's the process. Focus on the process. So I used to say that I'm an overnight success that took 10 years. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I've got 54,000 followers, but I didn't get 54,000 followers last year. I've been doing this for a decade. So it takes time, but I think the mindset is important.
I'm like, if you guys could all see me, well, I guess some of you can't see me if you're not listening to the audio version. I'm like, fired up over here, because there's actually like 10 little points of advice in there. And the big one is know what you want out of the platform, is how I would just overarchingly state everything you said. Because that helps you stay focused on like a long-term goal or a long-term result or traction, instead of getting caught up in metrics from like individual posts, for instance. That is the biggest trap you can fall into, because they're just not representative. And that's where the algorithm can drive you kind of mad, instead of just saying, over the long term, I'm going to show up consistently. I'm going to have an authentic voice and put what I want to put out there around my thought leadership, because that's the place that people are going to resonate. I'll tell you right off the bat, anytime I start posting stuff I feel like I should post because it's what my colleagues are posting, it falls flat. Versus if I say, what do I want to talk about today? And how do I want to tie that back to some lesson that's relevant to what I do and what I want people to know? It hits. So in a way, it's almost like trying less hard.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And the second strategy I'd encourage people to use is to do with being a great analyst, being a great observer and analyst, in that order. So, in other words, everything on LinkedIn in the content sense is public. Therefore, you should be able to see content that is doing very well. And if it's doing very well, you need to analyze why. And not just analyze it, but also figure out a way to utilize that kind of content yourself. So to be clear, I'm not talking about stealing great content. I'm talking about looking at content that is doing really well, figuring out why, and then using it in a way that works for you and your style. And I do this all the time. I'm constantly analyzing content and looking at, whether it's got great engagement, because engagement is not always great. And then I try to figure out why. Does that deserve the engagement? Why does that happen? Is it because the person has got thousands of followers? Is it the content itself? Has it hit a nerve? And I'm constantly thinking about, okay, how can I use that for myself? So use LinkedIn as a giant laboratory and observe, experiment, and then implement, execute.
There is this idea that, okay, yes, put what you want out there, but pay attention to what people are gravitating towards. And maybe you try out a few different things and see what gets the traction. And so, yes, maybe now you're paying attention to individual post metrics, and then you duplicate or replicate or amplify, even repurpose some of that kind of stuff, because clearly you've nailed a piece of your authentic voice and your thought leadership that your audience wants to grab onto. And I also think you have to pay attention to what that audience makeup is and get a little bit into the psychology of it. Because, for instance, I work with individual job seekers. I also coach coaches. And so a lot of my content kind of overlaps and bridges that gap because it's information both audiences are interested in. What I find is the engagement largely comes from the coach sector because they're the ones who are there, active, and engaging on LinkedIn in a visible way, whereas job seekers often lurk because they don't want anybody to know whose content they're engaging in. But that doesn't mean they're not there. And so that's where looking at profile views can be useful and getting a little bit behind the scenes and nerding out slightly to understand what and who your content is impacting and using that to develop that longer roadmap.
For sure. Yeah, lurkers are super important. I'm sure you have too. I've had countless people approach me and say, Andy, I've been a fan of yours for years, and I've never seen this person. And so what's happening there clearly is people are on the sidelines. They're making notes. You'll never see them until they decide to pull the trigger and hire you as a coach. So that's another reason for constantly, enjoying the process, not worrying too much about the stats, but know that of those thousands of impressions, there potentially are people within that audience that could be important to you further down the road. The third strategy, Angie, that I'd suggest people use is experiment as much as possible. You've got to try different things, and as you mentioned already, LinkedIn gives you so many different ways to express your thought leadership, to frankly how to touch people. There's so many different ways. So I experimented in a big way last year. In October, I decided that I was getting a little burnt out with doing posts on a kind of a weekly basis, and I was feeling a bit burnt out. And I also saw that reach was going all the way down, which I was mystified by, because I was thinking, aren't I on brand? Aren't I pushing out knowledge and advice that LinkedIn expects from me? Regardless, I wanted to change, and I pivoted to LinkedIn audio. So that's a big experiment, and I've done it for long enough now that I think I've got some insights, and I'll be writing about those shortly. And I'll continue with LinkedIn audio and perhaps do more newsletter stuff. So yeah, experiment. Always try something different. Do it for long enough so that you can actually get some actionable info from it, ideally.
The experiment thing is fantastic, and I'll just give you some very practical takeaways I've seen in doing that. One of the reasons we brought No More Mondays live to LinkedIn, for those of you out there listening and don't realize you can actually now watch this on LinkedIn, was because this mixed media strategy seems to be getting some traction. We all know video is just, hot in marketing right now. And so I wanted to try it. And some of this, Andy, frankly, was inspired by you and watching you do kind of mixed media things and thinking like, hey, my audience is on LinkedIn. A lot of the people I interview have audiences on LinkedIn. Why aren't we just going straight to the source? I also think there's some audio coming in my future. And I also want to point out the newsletter, because this ties back to something we were talking about in number 2, which is you just never know who's consuming your stuff.
Right.
And what I have noticed with the newsletter gets totally different readership than my content, because a lot of it's the lurkers. And I'll tell you, I'll get a message from somebody that says, hey, I would love your support in my job search. I would love to talk to you about business. And I've never even seen their name before, but clearly there is something that I'm putting out there that's gravitating, pulling them into me. And all of you can do the same thing. You just kind of got to figure out a little bit of your recipe and know that it's kind of more like cooking and not baking. It's not exact.
Absolutely. It's a great way of putting it. Yeah, I think we just have to think of ourselves in terms of how easy are we making it for the LinkedIn algo to decide that we are worth discovering by X. So I think it's discoverability. The more we can help the LinkedIn algo gods with our own discoverability, the better. So it could have something to do with verification. It could have something to do with collaborative articles. It could have something to do with LinkedIn audio or LinkedIn Live, as well as newsletters, posts. So that's what I mean about experimentation. But thinking about how can I be seen as the expert, the resident expert.
And the big thing is, it could be all of the above. It could be none of the above. And I think the big message I want to put out here, because I know people who are currently creating content on LinkedIn talk a lot about, like, how do I work the algorithm? Stop trying to work the algorithm.
Absolutely.
Try a bunch of stuff and collect the data. see what works for you, and the platform will work for
Yes.
you if you show up consistently. It's that simple.
Pretend the algo does not exist. The only thing that exists is you and a potential audience, and also satisfying your existing audience. Just focus on that, but most importantly, enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy the journey, and don't spend a precious second's thought on the algorithm. No one knows about the algorithm other than Tim Jerker. He's the director of engineering at LinkedIn. Him and his team, they're the only people that know categorically what the algo is and what it's doing and how to tweak it or when to tweak it. Anyone else who's talking about algo is talking garbage. They don't know, regardless of how much data research they say they've done but never show. That's a bit of a dig.
Yep. And even if you talk to Tim and you get the secret on the algorithm, which you won't, it's probably going to change tomorrow. So just give up. I love the recommendation to have fun with it, because, just kind of like to wrap things up with one last little story, maybe success story, if you want to call it that. A little over a year ago, I set out on a mission to get to 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, not because I wanted the vanity metric, but because I knew or had some ideas and assumed what I would need to do to get there. And I wanted that accountability to show up consistently and do the things that I thought would bring the results. And in doing so, it brought those results, plus a whole bunch of things I was pleasantly surprised to find. But it's a little bit exhausting. It would have been way more exhausting if I wasn't having fun with it, using my authentic voice and putting out what I thought would work versus, oh, is this going to get me 100 followers this week?
Right.
I didn't focus on the outcome. I focused on having that outcome drive activity. And I think that's a really important lesson to learn. And basically what this whole conversation is about, to inspire you to forget the myths, forget the best practices. Don't try to get behind the curtain. Just do.
Yeah, and it comes through in your work, Angie, doesn't it? If you are intrinsically enjoying the process, that comes through in everything that you do. But if it's a chore, if you're just trying to hit a target, then I don't think that's the best mindset. I don't think that leads to success.
No, and the best thing about it is I met some awesome people along the way. Like Andy Foote is my friend, and I only know him because of and in LinkedIn. So
true.
There you go, everybody. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, I have lots of LinkedIn friends who I've never met and may never meet, but we have strong relationships because we spend so much time together via LinkedIn. It's an absolutely fascinating construct.
We spend so much time whooping it up. Maybe we'll have to change that, and we'll have to have some like giant curious AF retreat at some point. There you go. There's your next challenge, Andy.
Awesome.
Until then, this has been How to Ace LinkedIn in 30 Minutes or Less with Andy Foote. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Angie.
All of you out there, go find him on LinkedIn. If you are not watching this on LinkedIn Live, you can head on over to nomoremondays.info, grab the show notes, including the podcast interview with the LinkedIn guy and the entrepreneur.com guy you referenced earlier. We're going to make sure we go find that and add that to show notes because I know I want to listen to it. But I hope all of you out there feel a little bit maybe more curious, even confident in engaging, maybe dipping a toe in that content creation water on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan, and I would love to see you around my network. I know Andy would too. So find both of us, follow both of us. Again, Andy Foote, thank you so much for joining me on No More Mondays Live. And to all of you out there, again, check out the resources from today's show at nomoremondays.info. And I look forward to seeing you on LinkedIn. And I will be at you with another episode of No More Mondays Live before you know it. Bye-bye.
Bye.